Okay, we powered through forms. That is the biggest component in HTML, and you got all the way through it. So honestly, good job, because that is hard to get through. And I know that learning HTML is not always the funnest thing in the world, but we're getting near the end of this course, and we're actually going to start creating stuff pretty soon. We're going to be able to create an entire layout, an entire web page from scratch using just HTML. Now, we've done a lot of component pieces here and there throughout this entire course, but eventually we're going to put it all together, and that's getting exciting. Now, before we do that, we need to learn a little bit more about HTML5 semantics. This is a subject I've touched on twice in this course, but in this particular video, we're going to learn about I want to say a plethora, but it's not really a plethora. We're going to learn about a handful of HTML elements that are really just related to HTML5 and why we're going to use them and where to use them. So let's go ahead and learn where we can use, for example, a nav element instead of a div element, or a footer element instead of a div element, or a section element instead of a paragraph element. And we're going to mix and match a lot of these a little bit down the road. So you're going to want to watch this video because there's going to be a lot of good stuff in here. And when we're done, again, in a couple videos from now, we are going to be able to create our own web page. So just bear with me just a little bit longer and we are going to get there. We're on that home stretch now. So let's go ahead and dig into this. Okay, and here we have a file, and I'm going to call this one HTML5 Semantics. And let's give it HTML:5 tab. And this gives me all sorts of stuff in here. So let's just call this HTML5 Semantics, which is really just a really fancy way. And by the way, computer engineers and computer scientists and developers do this all the time. We make up words, or we use bigger words to make ourselves feel more important. Semantics, honestly, this is just a really fancy way of saying we have a special naming convention for certain elements. So far, we've looked at a ton of different elements. We've got div, we've got input, we have form, we have button, we got paragraph, we've got strong, nailed it. We've got emphasis, we have you. That was a weird one. Keeps doing that for me based on another plugin I have on VS Code. We have all sorts of elements in here. And this is not all of them. This is just a lot of them that we've talked about. Moving forward, you can't use a paragraph for everything. That's not right. Paragraph is meant for text. And we could use a div for everything. And for nearly 20 years, we used a div for everything. Whether you had a navigation, so we would just put a comment in here, call it nav, and the class would be nav. We would have a div for that. And likewise, when it comes to a footer, we have a footer, and we just give a comment in here, footer. And again, that's a div. By the way, I did a cool little shortcut there. It's a CSS shortcut. So once you get more familiar with CSS, this is going to be really cool. It's called an emit abbreviation. So when you want to add a class, you just do like div, let's do a paragraph, paragraph.test. This is going to add a paragraph element, and you can actually see it down here with a class of test and an ID of ID test. Just builds it out for you. It's really nice. You don't have to use that. Not all editors come with that. If you're using Sublime, there is a third-party extension called Emmet, and you're going to want to use that. Once upon a time, we used divs for every single thing. And to be honest, we still do. We still use divs for probably far too many things. With the invention of HTML5, we said, no, this isn't right because everything looks like a div. And when we're reading our code and we're reading our source code, it's really hard to separate what is a div and what is not a div and what its purpose is. And sometimes we do this thing called obfuscating, where it's not called a nav. We change the class name to something like n or n1 or some sort of funny hash that looks something like this. You just don't know what it is, and without a comment, you're like, well, what is that? Is that supposed to be a nav? And now you have to read through all of the child elements to figure out what it is. And HTML5 said, no, enough of that nonsense. We are going to invent some new tags. So the first one we're going to talk about is nav. Honestly, this is the exact same as div. The only difference is, semantically, or the naming convention is different. It's a nav. It's a block element just like a div. But when a search engine lands on your page, or another developer is reading your code, they go, huh, I know that this is a nav. I don't need comments. I don't need a special class name or an ID. I don't have to read through all the child elements. I know that this is a navigation bar. I know what this is supposed to do. And so we would treat a nav the same way as we would a div. We have regular ID, because that's a global attribute. We have a class that's a global attribute. We could give it a title if we wanted to. We could give it all sorts of things. It's basically the exact same thing as a div, but the naming convention is a little better. Next, we have a header. So actually, I'm going to explain where these are used as well. So a nav is, let's go ahead and open up a website. Let's go to the famous imdb.com. So a nav would be like this section up here because it's for your navigation. It has your search, it has a bunch of links, it has your categories. That would be your navigation. And then let's just pick, can we even, nope, that's not what I wanted at all. Although that would be an example for something coming up. Let's do a search. Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. So in here, this could be a header because we have the navigation and just under it, we have a header. It's like a banner section. In fact, it is pretty much synonymous with banner. So that's what we would use a header for. A footer is a little bit different. So a footer in our example would be if we scroll all the way down, we're going to see all these little ugly links down here that most people don't pay attention to, but the occasional person does. It's also really good for search engine optimization just to have these quick links in here. So that would be a footer. This whole thing would actually be a footer. You've got more links in here. You've got your social media links. You've got the app links. You've got all sorts of stuff. And this belongs on every single page, just like your nav does. Next, we have an article. So can we find an example of an article? An article could be this entire section. And so instead of saying div with a paragraph and another paragraph and another paragraph, we would say article with the paragraphs inside of it. And that again just tells people, hey, look, this isn't just a regular div. This actually has a purpose. Next, we have aside. And aside is right in here. So it's almost like a menu system, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a menu system. It's something that belongs on the side. So you can think of aside as, a sidebar. Next we have, let's look at details. And so we have details in here, and this is more for, things like the copyright on your site. So when we go down here, I'm sure there's a copyright. Yep, there it is. 1990 to, our current year. Details is basically this. You would put and copy and then your year. So I'm like, I don't know, 2025 or whatever year it is. That would be your details. It just sort of gives more additional details instead of saying span, which is usually what we do because a copyright is often a different color on a lot of different websites. We want to change that to be details. And it's just a little more verbose. It allows us to understand what's going on faster. Next, we have main. This is a good one. We have main. Main is like your entire content section. So we have, this is a big page. So if we look at all of this in here, not the aside, but just all of this in here, and we keep scrolling. So we've got all this in here. On the left, we've got all of this. It keeps going, all of this, all of this, all of this, all of this, including the article, all of this, related videos, all that other stuff. This whole section up here, that's the main. And so inside of your main, you can have divs. Inside of your divs, you can have article. And inside of your articles, you can have a paragraph. And then maybe inside of your main or maybe outside of your main, depends on how your template is structured, you can have an aside. So this is your sidebar. Now in your sidebar, you might also have, that's not what I wanted, so you just have a link in here. You've got a bunch of different links in there. Or maybe you've got an advertisement or a sign up form or something like that. Next we have time. Let's look at time. And that one didn't want to autofill for me. I don't know why. Time is generally like when a blog is posted, but in this particular instance, it would be the 2 hours, 9 minute runtime from Spider-Man Far From Home. You could use that with the time element. So instead of, again, using a span, and then you would say like 2 hours, 9 mins, Instead of doing that, you would say time. Again, that's just like while you're reading your code, you can understand what's going on. What's supposed to be in here? Is it supposed to be anything in particular? Because what if, for whatever reason, there is no runtime? Maybe the data just doesn't exist and it looks empty. Well, right now, that looks pretty pointless. Looks like an empty span. So you go, I'm going to get rid of that. But if you use time, you go, oh, time, there's supposed to be something in here. There is meaning with this one. So maybe I'm not going to delete that. Maybe I'm going to run it by another developer who's working on the same project. And I think I just want to go over one more. There's actually a lot more, to be totally honest, but I think we're just going to go over one more. Let's use mark. And I don't know if this is going to work on IMDb, but let's give this a solid chance. Right click, inspect. And I have a div in here. And let's go ahead and how do I change just the HTML? Let's see if this is going to work. So I'm going to add mark over multiple errors / mark. Nope, that didn't work. That outputted it as basically HTML entities. So let's go ahead and let's delete some of this stuff. And let's create a paragraph with some lorem ipsum 25. And let's add mark. And you can actually see in VS Code, I love this. The mark element represents a run of text in one document marked or highlighted for reference purposes. Basically, you're taking a highlighter to it like you're in school. So let's not do all of them, but let's do those words. So we're going to put lorem ipsum dolor sit emet. I have no idea if I'm saying that right. With mark opening and closing wrapped around it. So let's go ahead and open up this file. And hey, look at that. And so now you can actually see, let's take a look at this. Oh, hey, you've got some details in here. That's pretty cool. It does a little opening closing thing for you. That's nice. And mark gives us a highlight. So that is pretty nice right out of the box. A lot of people custom code that as a span, but you don't actually have to anymore. So that is a quick rundown on HTML5 semantics. Just really additional elements that we haven't explored yet. Now, your task for this particular video is to simply hop on the Google machine or Bing or whatever search engine you like. Maybe it's DuckDuckGo, I don't know. But hop on your favorite search engine and research other HTML5 semantic tags. So we covered nav, header, footer, article, aside, details, time, and mark, but there are other ones out there. So you're going to want to take a look at those. And there's some that we haven't purposely covered that are a little more complex, but I want you to explore those on your own. Because at this point, you have everything it takes to start learning on your own. To be totally honest, you could shut down this course right now and be totally fine in the world of HTML without me. Guaranteed. So research more HTML5 semantic tags and maybe take a look at some other ones like figure. We didn't talk about figure, but it's a good one to go and explore. It's a little more complicated, but it's a good one to explore and test out. Once you are done with that, or you are bored with research, let's head on to the next lesson where let's go ahead and add a video to our page. Let's add a video that we are hosting to our page.